Hello and welcome to Can I Just Say, a Common Room radio podcast. I'm Elizabeth Stevens.
And I'm Daphne Olive, and we are talking about A Room with a View.
Which is beautiful.
Right?
Beautiful. I'm so grateful that you've introduced me to E.M. Forster because I am just loving it.
I feel like I've introduced myself to E.M. Forster in a way, too.
Lovely.
Because, wait, can I just like tell this story a little bit? So for people who haven't, I don't remember if it was in the podcast. I think it might have been after we were recording that we started when Louise came to talk to us.
Yes.
About Sense and Sensibility. We were just kind of throwing out, I think, like, oh, we want to do this. Maybe you want to do this. Maybe you want to do this. And like A Room with a View was kind of vaguely on my list, mostly for the movie because I love it. And she freaked out about it also because it turns out that'll be our next episode is when we get to freak out about the movie. And I was like, maybe we should cover that. And like overall, I said this back when we did Howard's End, like I loved those movies when they came out. And then in college, I read all of his books, like not for classes, just for myself. And I was like, oh, these are lovely. I enjoy them. Mm-hmm. But coming back to them, I've realized that there's so much more to them than simple loveliness. This one in particular, I was like, okay, we can do this. This will be like a nice little confection. Like even of his books, I thought of this one as like, cute romance, but like not that much going on. Boy, have I been surprised.
Yeah. There's so much there.
There's so much there, and his writing is just so beautiful.
I imagine that as you change the characters, and I imagine that you get a lot more out of it, and just as you mature and as you have more experiences, because it seems to be that kind of work
of Right. I mean, when I first watched the movie, I was younger than Lucy Honeychurch. I think I was 16 when it came out in the theater.
Wow.
And when I read all of his books, I was in my early 20s. So I wasn't that much older than Lucy Honeychurch.
Oh, of course. Yeah, it's got to be so different then.
It is so different.
Beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah, it's truly beautiful. Really, really, really beautiful. So this has just been the nicest treat for me. It's like I knew Jane Eyre was a huge surprise for me when we did that. Yeah. Jane Austen is Jane Austen. It was so much fun to talk about Jane Austen stuff, but I kind of knew what I was getting into because I'd read them so many times. And Forster has just been the loveliest revelation that I like him so much more than I thought I did, and I thought I liked him. So yeah, that's my little story about this. I'm very excited to talk about the film next too because
I'm looking forward to seeing it again. I have seen it at some point. But I was not at the time particularly impressed by or taken with it. So now that I know the story and love the story so well, I think I'm going to get a lot more out of it.
I'm really excited for you to see it too, because when you told me that privately, I was so surprised because that movie seems to me like I would have just assumed that was just a movie that was completely made for you.
Of
I'm
course.
Really curious.
Well, the book is absolutely. So I'm sure I was just wrong. And it's possible, too, that I was watching it during a time when I was taking in a lot of much more modern, I say modern, period dramas still, but more recent period dramas. And so I think part of it may have just been that I didn't get a very good quality of the picture. And that's what I remember, is it just seeming old. Like it just kind of, and it missing with me because of that. But now that I know the story and I'm so compelled and so there for it anyway, I think that I'm really going to love it.
I'm really looking forward to what your reaction is going to be. I mean, in between me and Louise just going, oh my God, this was such a big deal for me, which sounds like what's going to happen for part of that podcast episode at least.
That'll be a lot of fun for me.
So yes, our next episode, we will be talking about the Merchant Ivory film, A Room with a View, with our lovely guest, Louise Barnes.
That'll be so good.
It's going to be fun. Alrighty. So, but yes, now we're going to talk about the book. And I
Where would you like to start? Yeah.
I would like to start with something I realized while I was putting my notes together.
Uh-huh.
I had this, like, I have all these themes that are really interesting in this book. And one of the things I had prepared was all of these quotes of how different people talk about views.
Oh, yes. Mm-hmm.
And then I started thinking, I was like, oh, it's really interesting if you start kind of matching up the characters and their worldview and how they look at a view. But then suddenly it occurred to me that a view is about seeing.
Mm-hmm.
That it's not just like them talking about, a pastoral view, a view that you would see out of the window, but that on some level, because I had kind of tied it into this whole idea of Lucy being muddled.
Yes.
And maybe I should grab the quote that made me realize this, but suddenly I started to see it as view not just being a view you would look at, but a view in terms of your ability to see.
Okay. Yeah, that's lovely. Well, and as I recall, kind of the idea of a view and what that means kind of morphed over the course of the novel too a little bit, right? Or rather gets explored more?
That's a good way of putting it. I mean, I guess I was so tied to my idea of it being a way to expose who people are, the way they look at views, but then okay, I should just read that quote. Let me find it. Well,
yeah.
It came into this thing with Lucy when she's back in England. There's two moments where there's a discussion of a view that completely is tied to whether or not she's having this state of being that she calls, or the narrator calls, being muddled.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
This was the one that really did it for me. So it said, the contest lay not between love and duty. Perhaps there never is such a contest. It lay between the real and the pretend, and Lucy's first aim was to defeat herself. As her brain clouded over, as the memories of the view became dim.
I see.
The other time where she's muddled, I have that quote too, but I can just describe it. The other time she's muddled is when she goes into a room and she picks a room in her house from which there is no view.
Mm-hmm.
And
sure.
that's stated. So suddenly it occurred to me that, I mean, again, my first interpretation I think totally works, and we should go through different moments where different characters are relating to the idea of a view.
Mm-hmm.
But then it did occur to me that this also relates to whether or not they see clearly.
Sure. I like that.
I liked it too. I got very excited about that.
Yeah, I would have to see and watch how that tracks. I was telling you beforehand that I listened to this on audio instead of reading it like I usually do. So it's been a little bit harder for me to track things like that because usually I write so much in the margins,
right.
I dog ear so many pages, and this was different. I just have to hold on to it in my head and just kind of, so I have a more vague or muddled view, I suppose, when I go back.
Well, a different kind of muddle.
A different kind
we
of
do
muddled.
need to discuss Lucy and muddle and what that is all about. But
yeah, it all boils down, I think, to that paragraph that you just read. Yeah,
right.
Absolutely.
Right. So I can go through the bits that I saved about views, and we could discuss each of them.
That would be fabulous. Mm-hmm.
Would you like to start there?
Yeah.
Because my plan was to start talking about tourism. And tourists, but we could do that first. We could discuss
Sure.
the view moments, which I did collect. I hopefully didn't miss any, but I did collect them. So our first experience of a view, which is interesting, is that, of course, Lucy and Charlotte were supposed to have one. They didn't get
Right.
that, and the Emersons offered them their view.
Mm-hmm.
Which works on many levels. But if you're
course,
looking at this
yeah.
idea of a view being seen clearly through like a view representing clarity, that was basically Mr. Emerson offering Lucy clarity even from
Right.
the very beginning of the book.
That's beautiful. Yeah, and his perspective and his worldview. Yeah, like
Right.
his literal worldview offering up to her. That's gorgeous.
Exactly. And then it made me look differently at the moment of the kiss, the first kiss.
Mm-hmm.
Because that, one way to read that moment is that Lucy was kind of swept away. But another way to look at it is that because she's so overwhelmed with the view, she's actually seeing clearly.
Sure, that she's very well. It seems like when we are given the description of when George turns to look at her and she's so full of light and full of joy and she's holding the flowers, that she has stopped thinking so much about how she ought to behave and is just being herself.
Right.
Yeah, which is really lovely.
Right, which I feel like is pretty much what Mr. Emerson
has been getting at this whole time. And
right.
I love Mr. Emerson.
I know. I knew this was gonna end up just being like the Mr.
God.
Emerson fan podcast.
Yes.
And I am so okay with that.
He is my kind of person, my kind of character. Yes, he brought me to tears several times throughout the course of the book. He's just lovely.
He is just
and
lovely.
so sincere. I love when Mr. Beebe is first describing him early in the book and says, "I find it so difficult to understand people who always say what they mean."
Yeah,
it's really lovely.
Well, and one of my first favorite Lucy moments is when she says, which I think is right after that, she says, "Indelicate and yet at the same time beautiful."
Beautiful. Mm-hmm.
And I really love. Right, Lucy is. We'll have to discuss with whom Lucy is her best, but but in my eyes, Lucy, in many ways, is at her best when she's talking to the father, Emerson.
Absolutely.
And thinking about him, like he is almost like a beacon to her.
I think so. Yeah.
Again, another image about seeing and view.
Mm-hmm. Yep, definitely.
So yeah, then, it gets, I don't know. Do I want to go through all of the view things, or maybe I'll hold on to some of them till we're talking about those characters? Because it is really interesting. It's like most of the main characters relate to the idea of a view at some point through the book.
Yes.
And that was something.
I'm so interested in Cecil's, so I'm looking forward to getting to that one.
Right. So there's we have Cecil, who's almost the exact opposite. I mean, we can go there now. Do you want to talk about Cecil and View, or do you want to wait until we're talking about Lucy and Cecil? We can go straight into that right now.
Yeah,
I'm very much into this View concept, even though I totally want to talk about tourists. But we can get there too.
Let's talk about the View concept then, as it relates to Lucy, Mr. Emerson, and Cecil specifically, because I think that those are the 3 points of the triangle. Mm-hmm. Charlotte's in there too, I suppose, but she's so closed off. I think that it's hard.
Well, but she relates to this also, this moment where they're offering the view. Lucy's kind of doesn't really interact. She receives the view in the beginning, but she doesn't actually have, beyond kind of seeing some beauty in Mr. Emerson's, what she kind of sees as strange behavior. Mm-hmm. Charlotte's response is to think not about the view, but about propriety. So, I think,
and even her first day in the room, the first thing she does is close all the windows.
Right, exactly. And she tells Lucy to get away from the window. She has all this. So I think this kind of fits with this idea of view as a clarity of vision and clarity of thought. And
honesty, I think, too, like an honest vision of yourself as well.
Right. The ability to see. Mm-hmm. And Charlotte is actively using all sorts of things like propriety and shutters to actively close that off.
Yeah.
Which I think is the perfect way that is the perfect way to describe Charlotte.
Yes.
She has, we learn at the end, she has the ability to see. She just has done everything she can, which is
to close the shutters, yeah.
Right, which is what we watch Lucy do throughout this book, is have moments where she sees and then moments where she's closing the shutters on her own ability to see.
Yes, definitely.
I'm just really into this now. I could do this for an hour, but there are so many topics. But I'm just really loving this because it's not quite like a double meaning, but it is a little bit in a way.
Definitely
like it's,
so.
It's
Yeah.
like it's way too clever suddenly. I'm just like,
Definitely
this is
so.
like a room, like even the title, A Room with a View, has a very different meaning when you think about the view as like introspection and clear thought and seeing yourself and the world clearly.
Right. And your place in it. Mm-hmm.
Right. Then the idea of a room with a view has a very different meaning than just like something pretty.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, it's what made it so interesting for me when Cecil was talking about how he was like offended to not be thought of as a room with a view, to be thought of as a room with no windows, or
Right.
and even said, well, I would like to be thought of as, outside, even like being outdoors or wilderness. Like, what are you talking about,
Right.
Cecil?
And she's like,
You are so
maybe a
far
garden.
from that.
Maybe a garden. What she said? She said like maybe a garden, maybe a lane, but like not
Lane.
wilderness.
Sure, not wilderness, darling. No.
Well, which is interesting. That's also interesting because the moment where Cecil, kind of fell in love with Lucy is this idea he has of her with this mountain view.
Yes.
But again, it's so cerebral for him. It's all, he has to tie that into a Leonardo. He has to tie that into, he's not actually responding to Lucy, but he's responding to the place where he would fit Lucy into his intellectualization of what is beauty.
Sure. Do you like Cecil
No.
at all, period?
Oh, I have sympathy for Cecil. Mm-hmm. Like, what does like mean? In our usual way of talking about characters, definitely wouldn't want to hang out with him.
Right. Definitely don't want to sit next to him at a dinner party, as we say. Yes.
Yes, he would not be fun to spend time with.
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
I do have a lot of sympathy for him because we see his mother. I think, when we see his mother say to him, like, make her fit, make her be like us, I feel like you get a sense of how Cecil's approach to the world is something informed, something he's been taught.
Yes.
And not
absolutely.
necessarily, I mean, we'll have to have a long talk about Mr. Beebe. But I see, they are grouped together by the end as people who don't relate to people who
Right.
don't prioritize relationships and relating.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a harder time with it with Mr. Beebe because he had such promise, which is something he would say about Lucy. But but it's almost like Mr. Beebe understands things in a way that I find admirable, and yet he's still that person. Whereas with Cecil,
Mr. Beebe is a very good representation for me, it seemed, of like that clergyman, the church sort of person.
really,
yes.
more so than Mr. Eager. See, for me, that's Mr. Eager.
No, Mr. Eager, because Mr. Eager is so unlikable. He's so obviously wrong.
Right,
And that's
true.
not all of the experience for most people, I think, with the church. Most people are...
Oh, I see what you're saying. Like someone who has like all of the tools to see the world in a beautiful way, but still can't or refuses to, or whatever it is Mr. Beebe is doing.
Yeah, and I wouldn't even say that he refuses to, because I think of how he talks about Lucy at the piano and how if she could ever live as she plays, then the world would be better for us and for her. So I think he knows and he sees those things. He just like when they go swimming, he cannot stop thinking about the parishioners will see. The parishioners will see. I cannot be seen agreeing with this sort of behavior, which is different. Like, but that's artifice. That's not who Mr. Beebe is. That's his occupation.
Right. Okay, we might see Mr. Beebe a little bit differently.
That's possible.
Yes. Okay, we'll get to that because I want to talk about how people talk about Lucy. I want to talk about
Sure.
that. So let's hold on to my judgment about Mr. Beebe until then.
Okay.
And
Can
it's
I go
funny.
back to Cecil for just a moment?
Oh, absolutely.
Sure. Cecil, I think, I do not like him for Lucy, and I think that everything that George says about him is correct. But I had a lot of sympathy for Cecil, quite a lot. Right from the very beginning when he's telling Mr. Beebe about the engagement. And then he realizes, God, that was the shittiest way I could possibly have done that. And just like
Yeah.
feels chagrined and embarrassed, and then can't quite fix it. He keeps on getting himself to where he's like starts on a bad path, and you can tell that he is upset with himself, that he wants to like turn back and he wants to redirect his footing, and he just can't. He's just like, he has this stubbornness. And also I think you're right. He was just taught that things have to fit, that things have to be a certain way, which is another thing that came up a lot, that, you know, George was upset that the world and the universe didn't fit.
Right.
And Cecil likes things very, very ordered. But I thought it was so lovely that when Lucy comes to break off the engagement, and
he's so good.
He is so good. And she's so mad because he's so good. She's like, I love it when Forster says, or the narrator says, that she wanted him to be angry and peevish because it would be easier for her.
Right.
But she was bringing out all of his best qualities, actually. And in that moment, he was very likable, I thought. He apologized. He not only, in a way that Lucy never does, saw himself and said, oh God, this is a thing I would like to change about myself. And we don't get to know, I suppose, whether or not he does.
Well, no, we do know that he doesn't really, because it does say at the end when they're back in Italy, she says that she's sad that Cecil has taken a turn towards being kind of against women. So Cecil does, like, he does.
That's true. No, I remember that.
I mean, again, that's not, dude had a rough go of it. Like,
he did have a rough go of it. Sorry, my guy. Yeah, no, for sure. That's interesting.
I mean, again, he's complicated. He's a complicated person. He's a very complicated person. Again, I don't see him as good.
No.
Like, I don't see him as a good person, but I see him as an interesting, extremely flawed person.
Yes. But I think he's not stubbornly flawed, or he wasn't by the end. I think he was beforehand.
Right.
But I don't know. I softened to him a lot when he said, I wish that you had told me sooner so I might have had a chance to change. And maybe he couldn't have, but it was nice that he wanted a chance to.
Well, and Lucy didn't give anyone that opportunity because, I mean, that's one of my favorite lines is at the end when she's talking to Mr. Emerson and she said, but they all trust me. And he said, but why would they? You've been lying to everyone.
So good.
And that is the third of 3 chapters that is titled Lying to Somebody. But she was lying long before that.
Yes. Well, but again, to herself first. Like, she was lying to herself so much that paragraph that you read there in the beginning, like she had to defeat herself first.
Right. Over and over again.
It meant, just telling that same story over and over again.
Yeah. Well, and telling other stories. I mean, from the very beginning, she's doing that. You see her over and over again kind of get swept into moments of truth and clarity and then shut it down. She's terrified.
Why do you think that is? I'm sorry, that's a big question right in the middle of other things we're talking about.
Right, no, that is one of our topics. And I kind of want to save that till last. I feel like
I think that's smart. Yeah, I think I was jumping the gun a little. Sorry.
No, not at all. I mean, it is the big looming question. Mm-hmm. I don't know if I have an answer, and I was hoping that when we together go through all of the other things at the end, we can talk about that. Like, why is Lucy muddled? Because I feel like that's a bit of an open question in the story, and I think there are multiple ways to answer it. And so I feel like maybe once you and I have discussed all the other stuff, maybe at the end we'll be able to come to some clarity about that ourselves. But yeah, this is the one of my absolute favorite quotes. I'm trying to remember where I put it down because I copied so many quotes.
I'm sure. God, it's all so beautiful and so smart.
It's
just
so beautiful.
Poignant and moving. Oh, it's lovely.
Give me 1 second. I'm going to find it. Oh, here we go. So after George was so chivalrous and helped Lucy after the murder and threw away the postcards and all of that, and then they had their silent moment before they went back into the hotel. And then this is a quote from when they're going on the expedition before the kiss.
Right.
And she said, let me figure out where I want to start this. I'm just going to read the whole thing if you don't mind.
I don't. Never.
Okay, I'm going to read the whole thing because it's just too good. She looked on the expedition as the work of fate. We're going to have to talk a bit about fate, too.
Lots of fate in the book.
Lots of fate. But for it, she would have avoided George Emerson successfully. In an open manner, he had shown that he wished to continue their intimacy. She had refused, not because she disliked him, but because she did not know what happened and suspected that he did know.
Mm-hmm.
And this frightened her. The real event, whatever it was, had taken place not in the loggia, but by the river. To behave wildly at the sight of death is pardonable, but to discuss it afterwards, to pass from discussion into silence, and through silence into sympathy, that is an error. Not of a startled emotion, but of the whole fabric. I get chills when I read that. I love it so much. And for me, that shows that she has been essentially lying from the beginning, or living in this double state where she's aware of truth. She's aware of the clarity of thought and vision, and at the same time shutting it down out of fear. Fear is one of, but we have to go beyond. We have to go
factor.
Right, but we have to go beyond fear to figure out why she's so afraid.
Mm-hmm.
So this idea that Lucy's been lying to everyone and to herself is really from the very first moment of the book. It gets more exaggerated and more dire because she keeps having to do that thing where you tell a lie and then you have to tell another lie and then another lie and then another lie. And she often talks about how she's trying so hard not to lie. In the beginning, she managed to get by on lies of omission.
Yes.
And of kind of polite conversation rather than saying what she feels. But then that snowballed to the point where she had to out and out lie.
Yes.
Until she was unable.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like on some level we have to have sympathy for Cecil and for everyone who is having interactions with her.
Sure, because she's not playing fair.
She's not playing fair, and I don't think she's not a bad person.
No, not at all.
It's not that sort of thing.
She just has no self-awareness.
But she does have self-awareness. That's what's different about it.
I hear what you're saying. Yeah, it seems like, and I'm trying to get this textually because I know that we have the conversation where we're first being introduced to Mrs. Lavish, and who's hysterical. Oh my God, she's so funny. But I think it is Miss Bartlett, or Lucy is reflecting that Miss Bartlett has told her before that women can't do things or accomplish things, that they accomplish.
They're supposed to be support staff, basically.
Being support staff, and that's how. And if they don't, then they are subject to ruin.
Right.
And we see Charlotte is so interesting. Charlotte should not even be willing to be seen with Miss Lavish.
Right.
But the two of them chum right up, and it's just so interesting. I don't know. And Lucy, I think Lucy has just been, from her mother and Charlotte, and she's just been chaperoned all this time. And she relies on the Baedeker. She relies on Charlotte. She relies on, remember when she is just standing in Italy outside the church, outside Santa Croce, because she can't even enter the building by herself without a guidebook or a guide or a person. And she has no idea what to do when she's there. She doesn't know what art looks like. She doesn't know what will be the good art and what will be the bad. She just needs her guidebook. And then it says Italy charmed her and she just started to enjoy herself, which is lovely. God. And of course that's when the Emersons come in and she can kind of, that's when we get that line from Mr. Emerson, right? That you're repeating things that older people have told you.
Yep.
So I think some of it is just that safety net of someone always telling her, this is where you sit. This is the fork that you use. This is how you greet. This is, she's just been following directions for a very long time.
Right. But see, that's in large part, we are many books into our talking about women in novels in older times. This is one of the most modern ones of the ones we've done.
Right. Gosh.
But that is what she was supposed to do. I mean, that was her following the rules.
That was the life that she knew. That was her comfort zone, is all I mean to say.
Let's talk about guidebooks. Now I do want to take it to the tourism.
Okay.
I find this fascinating. I guess I should give a little bit of background about myself in relation to travel. And yeah, this part is very, 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 very fun for me. I spent 2.5 years off and on as a backpacker, where my husband and I would just go places and for months on end, and we did have guidebooks.
You would have to have a little bit of something, I'm sure.
The Lonely Planet was my friend, but we did do that where we just went, and so for me, I really enjoy, and this is clearly something we may or may not someday cover, Where Angels Fear to Tread, but this is another book that's set with English people in Italy. This is clearly a thing for Forrester. I'm sure he experienced it. I think a lot of people experienced it.
It seems like it was the thing to do.
Exactly. Yeah. It was the thing to do. It was the thing for people of a certain income to do, to go abroad, specifically to Italy, from my understanding. But that might be a very Forrester / Merchant Ivory.
I think those are the two, though.
reading.
Italy and the Alps, right? It's even mentioned in here.
Right.
I take them to the Alps instead.
Right.
Those are like the two places everybody goes. Yes.
So
the Mediterranean, I suppose, and the Alps.
These types are people that I'm very familiar with. And I'm fascinated with, this is when we get into, for me, this was like the first introduction to the whole concept of authenticity, which you and I agreed we were just going to talk about throughout, because there's really no way not to talk about that throughout. I'm very amused by this because, guidebooks are not bad things, first of all. Like, I just want to say guidebooks are not bad things. And one of my favorite interactions here, which I may also quote, no, I won't. This is when they're on their way on their little excursion day. And Lucy is in the, it's not a carriage, in the, whatever.
They called it a carriage.
They did call it a carriage. Okay. The vehicle with Miss Lavish and Mr. Eager. Can we just take a moment to appreciate the naming of...
The naming convention is fabulous. And I love that Eleanor Lavish has the character in her novel as Leonora.
Yes.
Which is... it's a little bit mean to Eleanor Lavish, I personally feel, but pretty hysterical, too. Pretty hysterical.
He is merciless with... Eleanor Lavish.
Yes.
So I just love that they're all asking Lucy, like, oh, are you here for art? Are you here for experience? Are you here? Like, they have an idea of what authenticity is. And her answer is, I'm a tourist. And I love that because it's such a beautiful subversion. Like, in my eyes, the person who's being authentic is the English person who comes to Italy and just says, yeah, I'm just a fucking tourist. Like, I'm just here to be a tourist.
Exactly. That's such a good point.
Right?
Because I hate Miss Lavish's whole, what is the thing she says? Oh, I want to write about the real people of Italy and these humble lives of these poor. You're like, shut up.
And
what is your problem?
She's the anti-view person. She's the person who's like, don't go for the beautiful views. Let's get down and dirty in the streets. Like, we're going to walk. And then she gets lost. And I love that. And I just as a person who was a backpacker for many, many, many months, I gotta say, it's pretty tedious. Like, those people, it is so tedious. I can't tell you how many times I would end up having dinner with a group of people that I just met, where the whole dinner is people one-upping each other on where you go and what you do to have the most authentic experience of the country you're in. Oh, no, you went to that place? Everyone goes to that place. No, you have to go to this little village and this little place and this. Then you're actually seeing the real thing. Months, years of that.
I can see that.
So it's just really funny for me because the context for me was just very hilarious because I know those people so well.
Sure.
And I love that he's exposing them, but not just. I mean, obviously he does want to take a dig at those types of people. And, more power to him. He did it really well. But at the same time, he's using it to expose their relationship to views. That Eleanor Lavish doesn't care about views because she wants to get gritty. She so objectifies Italians and Italy that she thinks that somehow the lack of beauty is the true expression of them.
Sure. Yes.
And then you have
the view is false somehow. Like the view is glossy in a way that she wants it to be. Smelly? Remember, she's talking about how Florence has its own smell, truly Florentine smell.
Right, and then you have those moments with Lucy where it's where she's being a little petulant, but those are actually moments of clarity for her.
Yes, yeah, I can see that.
When she says, "I'm a tourist," that is what she is.
Yes,
that is exactly what she is, and she. Those are the moments for me where you see that Lucy actually has a natural inclination towards authenticity because she doesn't need to find these pretensions. It doesn't even occur to her to seek them out. Yes, she feels afraid when she doesn't have the protective layer of the things that make her comfortable, but she's not busy trying to recontextualize what she's doing for the sake of having it seem more important or more glamorous or more whatever. And then you have Mr. Eager, who uses these excursions as a way to talk about all of the very important people he knows. For him, a view is like a way to access prestige.
Yes, sure.
So it's almost the opposite. Well, it is. I mean, I think we see that he and Mrs. Lavish are constantly at odds with each other, but both of them are kind of have a relationship to a view that feels very much constructed with their idea of what they think will make them look good.
Sure. Yes.
So it's not about seeing themselves. It's about superimposing some sort of mask for other people to see of them.
Yes, I like that. Do you think that Lucy enjoys her? Well, okay. Do you think that Lucy is a good tourist? I think that Lucy, I appreciate when she tries to use the language. She tries to speak Italian. It's hysterical, and she does it poorly. And I love when she's telling the driver that she's looking for the good men. Where are the good men? And he's like, "Oh, this one. No, I know the one you're looking for." It's George, of course.
I love that.
He's speaking an entirely different language than Lucy, which is, truly Italian.
He's bringing her. He's bringing her to the good man. He is a good man. He's the only one there that is a good man.
Mm-hmm. Which, God, that was so well done.
Yep.
Anyway, I don't see her so many of the what I would have called the bad tourists, and especially Mr. Eager, spoke so critically of the Italian people. Mm-hmm. And Lucy kept on saying, I'm trying to think if she said outright that she liked. Well, she said, I like to think that everyone is nice, basically.
Right.
She wants to think well of everyone until proven
I don't know if that
otherwise,
makes her a good tourist. It just makes her a good person.
Yeah, is respectful and appreciative, who says, God, this art is incredible. God, look at the architecture. God, all the people are so great. Wow, what a wonderful treasure this place is. That, to me, is a good tourist. What did you want to talk about when you said you wanted to talk about tourists?
How people's relationship to being in Italy shows things about them.
That
it has nothing to do with Florence. Florence doesn't give a shit if you're a Mrs. Lavish or if you're a Lucy or if you're a Mr. Emerson.
Okay.
Florence is just Florence, no matter what. But how they relate to being in Florence is 100% about who they are and what their values are and tells you, I think, a huge amount about those people. You could say that Mr. Emerson, his loud talking when they were inside of the church was not great behavior.
Sure, yeah.
Right? So, that is a moment where I think, as close to absolute perfection as Mr. Emerson is, his, do I want to call it his adamant...
disregard for social norms?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
I do think there is a tiny bit to be faulted there. And I think it's interesting.
I think that's fair.
That George, as surly, I don't know, is surly the right word? As sad as George is in the beginning, I don't even think he's surly. Because I don't think he's
defeated a bit. Yeah,
right. He's not surly would mean he's imposing it on others. And I don't think George ever imposes his emotional problems on others.
Yeah. Despondent, maybe?
Yeah, despondent is a good word for what George was in the beginning. And so I think it's interesting that George grew up with his father, like grew up kind of being taught the worldview of his father, which has a lot of beauty to it, but that his father is so adamant about being that thing that it almost does go too far at moments.
Yes.
I do think that it's interesting because in the church we find out later that it was Mr. Eager, who we so dislike, whose tour was being interrupted by Mr. Emerson's behavior. So like you could be like, oh well, we hate Mr. Eager anyway, but it isn't appropriate. It's not appropriate to I mean, that is, in my eyes, bad tourism.
It was
that is actually bad. That is bad
Yeah.
tourism. Is when you walk into a place and you talk so loud that you're interrupting someone else's experience of that place.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Nobody gets to be perfect. Thank goodness in this book.
I like that very much too.
Yeah, and what's interesting is that instead of people being perfect, you get people who are the person the other person needs at the moment or doesn't need. But that's what it is, that it's all about, it's less about the judgment of the person themselves than how they exist in interaction with someone else. And even Mrs. Lavish, like you talked about Mrs. Lavish and Charlotte and their friendship, as destructive as that friendship can be, in a way, it actually is also ends up being the thing that brings Lucy and George together, which is fascinating.
I think that the two of them could really use each other, actually.
Right.
They seem like, yeah. It's just funny because I would just think that Charlotte, the Miss Bartlett, would not have allowed herself to succumb to the temptation of spending time with Ms. Lavish, but she certainly does, and without apology, which is interesting. I think her a very smart kind of woman, or whatever she says.
I think she can't resist. I mean, I think she needs an outlet.
I think that's a good,
and that's what Ms. Lavish offers her, is the outlet and a bit of danger. I mean, her telling Lucy's kiss story is like her living dangerously.
Yeah.
And I think Charlotte needed that desperately. And I do find it fascinating that the book, like, judges them in the short term. Like, when you're seeing that through Lucy's eyes, I mean, it is horrible what she did. It is very bad what Charlotte did. Like, in the kind of just like, it is
aggregate.
Right. It is bad behavior. But I find it fascinating that the book allows the ultimate good to have come out of this bad behavior on both of their parts. Like, it was bad of Charlotte to tell it. It was really bad of Lavish to write it in her book.
But I think that's all part of the fatedness that George talked about. Like,
right.
It's fate that brought me here. You can call it Italy if it makes you feel better, but I like that.
I like that too. Okay. He's saying that to Mr. Beebe. So let's talk about Mr. Beebe now.
Okay. You start. Yeah, I don't have a great handle on Mr. Beebe all the time. I like him.
I'm amused with myself.
In him.
See, I don't know if I like him. Okay. I always fall into the same trap with Mr. Beebe. I even tweeted that quote about if Lucy lived life the way she plays piano, or however he words it. This is the thing about, like, that quote is almost Mr. Beebe in a nutshell. Yes, I have it in my long column of what people say about Lucy, because people really are very focused on Lucy. I know she's our protagonist, but everyone's entirely too focused on Lucy in this book. If Miss Honeychurch ever takes to live as she plays, it will be very exciting both for us and for her. Can I break this down to how I say this is like the epitome of Mr. Beebe?
Sure. Yeah.
Why he makes me angry. Because I always see that quote. Every time I see that quote, I get excited. I tweeted it. I was like, look at Mr. Beebe. He's kind of our feminist. Like, he is in Lucy's corner. He is trying to, like, help Lucy flower into the person she's supposed to become. This is amazing. But he doesn't just talk about her living the way she plays. He says exciting both for us and for her. And for us comes first. And that's Mr. Beebe for me. Is Mr. Beebe, there's a lot of talk about how he's very good at social situations. There's the terrifying quote about how his hobby is young girls. Shall I find that one? I have that one too. All his life, he loved to study maiden ladies. They were his specialty. And his profession had provided him with ample opportunities for the work. Girls like Lucy were charming to look at, but Mr. Beebe was, from rather profound reasons, somewhat chilly in his attitude towards the other sex, and preferred to be interested rather than enthralled. Okay, there are many layers to this.
Mm-hmm.
I never know if, like, it feels respectful or disrespectful. Like, I did bring this up when we talked about Howard's End. Forrester was gay. I believe he was closeted his whole life, although he did write his last book, Maurice, is the story of is a gay romance. I believe that it was published after he died. I don't know if I should have remembered to research this again before we started, but I didn't. So there is a lot of gay subtext in here, which is kind of delightful. And I think that that's part of what's going on in that quote that I just read. I feel like you definitely could read Mr. Beebe as a gay character.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
I just want to make sure that no one thinks that that's what my criticism of him is. My criticism of him is that he wants what you find out by the end after a whole book, that every single time I read or watch this, I think, oh, Mr. Beebe is totally in Lucy's corner. And then I remember that he's only in Lucy's corner as long as she is there to delight him.
Mm-hmm.
Ultimately,
exactly right.
It's about him.
Mm-hmm.
And this is why I get really annoyed with it.
Yeah, no, definitely. He definitely is just kind of collects people for entertainment value. Yeah.
Exactly. He exactly does that. And and it's like, like, they're characters like that, and you're kind of like, oh, what? Like, that's a less interesting character. And you're like, okay, he's a collector of people, whatever. The problem with Mr. Beebe is that he shows so much promise as an advocate for her.
Mm-hmm.
And as a person who truly wants her to come into herself for herself. And I every time I feel a little duped. Like, somehow I manage to be duped every time. And like this,
Sure.
So this, I might just be angry with him because he's duping me, but I feel like that's maybe what he's doing to her. Like, that is his role. His role is to be the person who's pretending to
make you feel like you're in a safe space almost.
Yep.
Yes.
Right? And everyone tells him their stuff. And
Right.
you know, and all the feminist lines come from him. Like, he's the one that notices, you know, when Mr. Beebe introduces Freddie and George, and Freddie's uncomfortable and doesn't know what to do, so he's like, want to go have a bathe? Which I love this. It's delightful in the book, and it's more delightful even in the book than in the movie, because you do get all the interiority of what people are thinking and stuff. But it's really great in the movie. Mr. Beebe's the one who says, oh, you know, if only, you know, this is how you know this is men and not women, because women would never start, you know, even out in the most uncomfortable situation, would not try to break the ice by saying, want to go have a bathe together.
That is true.
So it's like, Beebe is like our voice of feminism to some extent. I mean, other than Mr. Emerson, who's our voice of everything.
Mr. Emerson is definitely the first voice.
Well,
and George, I think George's speech is lovely. And then when he comes in and says that that Cecil is always trying to tell Lucy what to do and how to think and what offends her, and she says to him, and now you're doing the same thing, basically. And he's just, the wind goes out of his sails, and it's like, God, yes, I am. It's so deeply ingrained in me and in all men and in women too, which we see obviously Charlotte is like the least feminist of all of them. And that we have to fight together to fight against like that instinct and against the culture. If, what did he say? If we're ever to enter the garden, it was something lovely.
Yeah, that's Mr. Emerson, the enter the garden part. That's
that's
about men and women, and that we need to lose our shame about our bodies.
Yes.
And that men are slightly ahead of women on that, but until both sexes learn how to not have shame in our bodies, then we can't enter the garden.
Oh, God, that's beautiful.
I know. He's so good.
So many beautiful lines. Yeah.
Well, and it's very appropriate that Mr. Beebe and Mr. Emerson are the two voices of feminism, because throughout there are parallels with them. I mean, that's the thing, is that we, until the very end, until that scene in Mr. Beebe's library, we do have all of these parallels between the two, and then we find out what the true difference is that Mr. Beebe is against passion. That Mr. Emerson is for passion and Mr. Beebe is against it.
Yeah, I like that when Lucy talks about how that Mr. Emerson might claim to be irreligious, but it's obvious that he's just as, I think she even says religious as Mr. Beebe is. It just presents itself differently. Yeah, no,
that's
absolutely.
exactly what I'm quoting. Yeah,
she definitely speaks to him as though he was like a pastor figure or a priest figure to her.
Wait, but not only that, like that this idea that one of them, again, for me, this always comes back to Mr. Beebe and ultimately it being for himself. He's like, he was so happy for Lucy to go to Greece. Like, he so wanted her to have freedom, as long as that freedom wasn't a romantic entanglement. Like, ultimately,
and why is that?
I think that because when he loses, when she would marry, like he was also kind of against her marrying Cecil. Like he was so relieved when she chose not to marry Cecil. And you could have thought, oh, this is because he wants Lucy to like find her true way. He wants her to be herself and have a view, like have clarity about herself. Except that when it switches to George, he's upset. And I think it's ultimately that, is that when he wants them all to be fascinating bachelors and bachelorettes so that they can play piano for him and have tea with him. But if she was married, she would be busy with her husband and her children, and she would no longer exist for his entertainment. I mean, I really think this is, I mean, I guess, now I would maybe want to segue into this idea of the objectification of Lucy, but I think on some levels, Mr. Beebe is a wolf in sheep's clothing when it comes to that one point, is that in that one thing, he plays such a good game at making you think that he wants Lucy to become her full potential for herself, but he really just wants it for him. He wants to be amused. I think he's bored out of his mind.
Yeah.
Honestly.
That's a good point, actually, but yes. Oh, Mr. Beebe.
So shall we talk about the objectification of Lucy?
Sure.
I felt weighed down by it. I mean, not in a way that I didn't enjoy the book, but I felt like it was a constant drumbeat.
Yeah.
Everyone wants Lucy.
Well, and I wonder if that's part of why she feels that weight of expectation so much.
Yes. This is the closest I came to an answer about that stuff. It's, just think about it. Like, even, Charlotte's not wrong when she's like, oh, they want you for the party, and everyone wants to sit in the carriage with Lucy.
Yes.
And everyone wants to talk to Lucy. Everyone wants Lucy all the time. When they're in Italy, also when they're in England, like she talks about how her brother is upset she's getting married for that same reason, because she won't belong to him anymore.
That's a good point.
Right? There's just, that's why I had this long column of people's observations of Lucy, because it is, I mean, of course, then there's Cecil, who is only describing her in terms of art, in terms of these, again, this is partly his limitations as a person, but her experience of it and our experience of it is that everyone just wants a piece of her, I feel like.
Yeah. Oh, poor darling.
Right? So my question was, where do you think that the narrator fits in all of that?
In the wanting of Lucy? In the objectification of Lucy?
Yeah, in the objectification of Lucy.
She certainly is one big metaphor.
I mean, I don't know if I have an answer. I feel like the narrator maybe goes back and forth. Like sometimes the narrator feels critical of the people for being that way, and sometimes I like when the narrator
seems to be a general shrug of like they can't help themselves. That's kind of how I feel.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like this is the way things are. That a young, beautiful,
She's
talented
lovely.
woman is going to be in a position where it almost felt to me like throughout the book, like everyone's just kind of ripping at her skirts. I mean, not in a rapey way, but like ripping at her skirts because they just all want a piece of her, like the way toddlers would like hold on to their mother's skirts. That same kind of thing. I felt again not in a way that made me not enjoy the book. I enjoyed the book so much, but I felt slightly oppressed by it this time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because
I can definitely see that.
Yeah, because I felt like I saw it in a different way. Maybe because I'm older, so I felt like maybe the book was implying that I would also, like that's what it is. I feel like the book actually makes us join.
Yeah, just a little bit.
It implicates us in this objectification of Lucy in a way.
That's a really lovely point. Yeah. Yeah, because even if we land on Mr. Emerson's side, it's still like wanting to push her into something that we see as being better for her, or to mold her a little bit, or to strip down something. And even those are less sincere, I suppose, than they could be.
Well, and if you take that situation, like that thing that you referenced about her and the guidebook, right? So she's standing outside this church. She was supposed to go with Mrs. Lavish, right? Mrs. Lavish, or I don't know if it's Miss Lavish or Mrs. Lavish. I keep going back and forth. Whatever.
I think Miss. Yeah.
Who was like, "Oh, I will be your guide today," and then she's like, "Oh, I must run off right now." After she took the guidebook from her, and that's what's also interesting is that I feel like everyone wants Lucy when having Lucy suits them,
right?
And then they are quite dismissive of Lucy at the very same time.
Yeah. Remember when she's talking about going to Greece and she says how terrible it is to like pretend that you're going for work or for mission when really nobody wants you, is what she said. It's very interesting. So many people so clearly wanted her.
Except they did and they didn't. Like they want.
Yeah, like it was that specific.
She's like The View. They want her because she's a thing of beauty that has almost a monetary like value. Like it has a value to most of them because it's something they can trade. They can trade for a sense of importance or a tie to being young or a sense or the ability to overlay their own expectations and values on what they're seeing as a blank slate. But I feel like none of them actually, except for George, maybe, want her for herself. They all want her for how they can not enrich themselves, but like how they can prop themselves up in their own idea of themselves through use of her. And like Mr. Beebe has his moments, like him noticing, or everyone notices her in her music. That's the interesting thing. Like everyone notices that. Everyone sees that aspect of her. Oh, that's interesting. So everyone sees something that's truly about her in the one thing where she actually gets swept up in herself.
Yes.
That's the only, like, it's made very clear that's the only time that she is not at all muddled and loses all of that.
The only time she's really extraordinary, I feel like.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Really magnetic.
So that's the one thing that everyone notices about her. Is her ability to play. That's interesting. So yes, that felt weighty. This is the closest I've come to an answer for why she feels like she had to keep everyone's trust by breaking it. I guess is what I'm going to call her being muddled. Like, it still doesn't explain why she's so afraid of feeling. I don't know why she's so afraid of feeling.
Is it just because she doesn't have a witness, or not a witness, but like a role model of that, or
that could be part of it.
She talks about being, or it might just be that she has been told that those things are silly, that they should be stuffed down. Like, remember when she's talking about seeing George coming to kiss her and says, oh, it was from a book or something silly. And she's always describing herself as silly or too girlish or I can't understand this because I'm a woman or I can't understand this because I'm a girl.
Until some sort of inner assertiveness bubbles up, like then
all of a sudden she just which is always so nice when that happens. Yeah. And that little bit of feistiness comes out.
Yeah. So I mean, that's the thing. So do you see Lucy being muddled as something that's happening to her, or something she's doing to herself, but it's being described to us as something that's happening to her?
I definitely, she's doing it to herself, but it is also because she is trying so hard to accept the worldview and the culture that has been placed on her. Like she's working very hard to fit into that mold, I think.
Do you see Lucy as exceptional? Like, is this...
I don't think I do particularly.
Okay. So that was my other question. I was very interested in asking myself this. I'm not sure, because we do have these moments of, I think the book, even though the book doesn't have like just good or all bad people, the book obviously, I would say, sides with the Emersons and that style of that worldview.
That perspective. Sure.
Right. And so we do have these moments, as I pointed out earlier, that Lucy seems to have some innate version of that. And so I guess my question about exceptional is like, are we supposed to believe that Lucy has that because she's special, or does everyone have that? And could we go back and see how all of the other characters, like Charlotte's the one character that we know actively destroyed that side of her, or tried to destroy that side of her, right? It also came out at the very end. But so we know Charlotte is an example of someone who could have been maybe a Lucy, but like for whatever reason, for whatever mix of circumstances and will, she became a Charlotte. Like, I see it as like Charlotte made herself into a Charlotte.
Yes. Sorry,
all of the listeners who are named Charlotte, but she made herself into that Charlotte, that version of Charlotte. So yeah, do you think that Lucy has that spark of Emerson-likeness because she's special, or because everyone has it?
I would say because everyone has it. And I think that's what Forster seems to me to be trying to get across too.
Like, does Cecil have it?
Yeah. I do think so. I think that Cecil...
I mean, I think I agree with you. I feel like this has been kind of an open question for me, that I have not come down strongly on one side or the other. I would like to think that everyone has it.
I think certain people can just sort of embrace it more easily. Everyone is you can't ever say everyone or no one, I feel like. But the majority of people, I think, do have just a sense of understanding that the rules are a little bit arbitrary and that culture is very specific and just, a social contract that we're all in. And I think that it seemed to me that that's why Cecil admired Lucy so much when she spoke out. And he said, I feel like I'm just meeting you today, like you have a new voice. Right. He seemed to say that in real admiration. And that's when he started to panic about losing her, you know. So I do think that it's there, at least a bit. He's not any good at it.
Right.
I think that all of the accusations that George levels against him, I think are accurate. But I don't know. George himself is far from being delightful and enriching. I don't think I would like him much at all if it wasn't for his dad.
Right. That's an interesting thing. I think that if there's one fault, that was one of my questions that I sent you ahead of time. Like, do we like Lucy and George as a couple? I go both ways with it. Like, there's one moment which I can read because I did take it down. Would you like me to read my I love Lucy and George together moment? It's after they're playing tennis. Was it tennis? Whatever they're playing. I think it is tennis. Yes. George says, "Do you mind being beaten?" She was going to answer no when it struck her that she did mind. So she answered yes. She added merrily, "I don't see you're such a splendid player, though. The light was behind you, and it was in my eyes. I never said I was." "Why, you did." I love this back and forth between them. I mean, I was just like, it's a snippet. It's a tiny, tiny snippet. Also, at the end, we do have, the ending is lovely. But it's this tiny, tiny view because their interactions in Italy, we only really saw, I think he is like actually speaking, but we really saw those ones very much through Lucy's muddled head, right? That she's just so confused, and we're really getting
and
her
trying
perspective.
So hard not to be attracted to him,
right?
She obviously
so we're really seeing it through. So I felt like this was the one real moment where we actually saw them interact with each other.
Yes.
And it's quite lovely. Like, it's adorable. There's a cute back and forth. And the beautiful thing is that Lucy was about to say the polite thing, and then she was like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
And I love
actually
that.
think or feel that way.
Right. And I'm going to say it. And we're going to actually have kind of an adorable back and forth about this. We're going to tease each other a little bit. And that's the moment where I say, okay, maybe there is something to this. Like, maybe I could have used a little bit more of that to so that I could feel better about them as a couple. Like, I feel like I'm told that they're going to be good together and that he's going to be good for her, but I don't, except for this one moment, I don't really see it.
I also, though, I really don't think that either of them are all that extraordinary.
They're not that interesting.
They're not that interesting. But what's interesting is that they love each other and could choose to be together by surmounting obstacles and losing relationships. Or they could choose an easier path.
Right. I do buy that they actually bring out better sides of each other. Like, definitely. I feel like
and that they truly love each other. Like, when we get that lovely thing about there in the end where it says, it was all the joy they could have expected and 1,000 little joys besides that they never even thought of, was gorgeous. Gosh, I was getting all teary.
And I believe it then. So it must have worked, because I do actually believe it.
But that doesn't mean that this was no Jane Eyre and Rochester situation where they were just like these massive characters with so many different wants and needs.
Right.
And they're
very domestic people. They're having a domestic love, and it's lovely.
Domestic, yes. I like that.
I like that too. Like, actually, if like that's where we come down on them, that like neither of them is particularly extraordinary, but they are well suited to each other. And somehow, despite all the odds, they ended up together.
Right.
And it's like, I like that story. That's a good story. Yes. And and it's true. You're right. I totally buy it at the end. Like, I am on board when they're in their room with their view and having their little conversation and all of that. Totally works for me. And he again takes her to the window. Takes her to the window.
When he says to her too, the ones that truly love us will come back to us. Basically, they will find us again or something. So, and the ones that the Mr. Beebs and etc. can go where. Yeah.
Well, and this also feels to me, this is what's interesting about Mr. Emerson. Maybe we should just talk about Mr. Emerson some more. What's interesting to me about Mr. Emerson is that he talks about great romance. I mean, like human to human romance. But ultimately, he's a materialist. Like, he's not a person who lives with his head in the clouds, even though what is it that George says that, let me talk about those views quickly. This is interesting, Mr. Emerson and views. Let me get back to my views page. When I don't remember who asked George about views, and George says that all views are the same, which is also fascinating to me.
All views are the same.
They are all the same
What
to
a
him.
silly thing to say.
I don't agree. I think that that's a fascinating thing to say. Because I think that George is a person who doesn't, again, you have to look at it with this double meaning of view. But even if you're looking at it with the literal view of a view you would see out of a window, I think this is an interesting, like, parallel contrast with Cecil. Like, Cecil can't really see views because he's so in his head that he's only seeing the views the way his preconceived notion of the view would be
Sure.
based on art. George is possibly so self-satisfied in a way, or self-grounded, that he doesn't even need...
When did he say all views are the same?
I have to remember.
Was it before or after the murder?
Oh, no, it's in England. They're talking in England.
Okay, so it's well after.
Oh, well after, yeah.
Okay, all right, okay.
So I
just don't remember that.
find
Okay.
it fascinating that it's like he almost doesn't need it. He doesn't need the external stimulus to see beauty.
That's interesting.
That's
I
how
would have to
Do you want me to
pick at that for a little while.
Do you want me to find
Go
that?
ahead.
Do you want me to find that, like, the actual place where it happens? I have it noted here as I have it noted here as, like, when he's in England, but before the book they were exposed to the book.
Okay, sure. Yeah,
So
I'll be
it's
able to
like
find
that little moment of peace
There's
between
not that
him
much
and
time
Lucy,
there. Mhm.
where they were being, like, a little flirtatious, a little happy, and they have this conversation about views, and then, okay, here we go. This is, I think, her mother asking, "How do you like this view of ours, Mr. Emerson? I never notice much difference in views." "What do you mean?" "Because they're all alike. Because all that matters in them is distance and air." Oh, it's Cecil. He's talking to Cecil about this. So he says, said Cecil, uncertain whether the remark was striking or not. That's pretty much
so
the
good.
two of them in a nutshell. I love that. And then he says, "My father," I guess Lucy's there too. He says, "My father," he looked up at her, and he was a little flushed, "says that there's only one perfect view, the view of the sky straight over our heads, and that all these views on earth are but bungled copies of it." And then a little bit later he said, oh, actually, I have the whole thing. And then Cecil says, "I expect your father has been reading Dante."
Cecil.
I know. And then George is talking about his father again. He says, "He told us another day that views are really crowds of trees and houses and hills, and are bound to resemble each other like human crowds, and that the power they have over us is sometimes supernatural for the same reason." Lucy's lips parted. "For a crowd is more than the people who make it up. Something gets added to it. No one knows how. Just something has got added to those hills." There's a peacefulness to this way. I mean, again, this is now George describing his father's worldview, so it's not exactly coming from Mr. Emerson.
Right.
But there's something really beautiful about this bit here, because for me, it's not George unable to see. It's George almost seeing through all of it to understanding something more essential than what everyone else is seeing when they're looking at views. And part of it's through what his father told him, and part of it is through his own observation, because we're getting a mix there in this conversation. And I find that really beautiful. There's just something very peaceful about it for me, that little section of the book.
Yeah, I don't know what all to make of that. I think if I had more time to... I'm surprised that I missed that before. Yeah. I think it kind of sets him and Lucy up together more. Like because he says, views are all the same, but my father says this. I wonder if that's not kind of akin to Lucy not really thinking about how she sees or thinks about the world, just kind of
Oh, no, I think George has
accepting-
very much thought it. I think George is because he's actually saying something different than his father. He's saying, this is how I see it. This is how my father sees it. I think he sees beauty in the way his father sees it. But his observation first is not that of his father's. It's a different one. He says they're all alike because all that matters in them is distance and air. There's just something very elemental about it that George almost doesn't need the specifics of the world to appreciate it. And that is actually, when I think about it, that is a moment where he's like, Lucy's so caught up in all of this stuff that doesn't matter. All of these details, all of these fleeting things. And George is expressing something that goes beyond even the specifics of one view over another. It's just about existence. So it's like she's fluttering around and she is so not grounded. Like Mr. Beebe had that image of like her as a kite and Charlotte holding the string.
Yes, that's
which,
right.
Even though Mr. Beebe makes me angry, he's very insightful.
Yes, no.
And I feel like what George is saying has a different kind of groundedness than someone on the ground holding you by a string. It's someone offering a different worldview that has such a basic groundedness to it that it's not restricting. It's just offering. Again,
and interesting.
And what's interesting about the influence of his father on him is that, like I started to say before, is that Mr. Emerson has elements of a romantic, but also of a materialist. Like he's constantly saying, "Oh no, we're just going to get buried and rot in the ground." Like he's such a materialist and such a romantic, and I love. I mean, this, especially after Howard's End, that just feels. This feels like Forster's particular brand of magic, that he can create characters that embody both of those things so beautifully.
That is lovely, yeah.
But then George seems to me almost like a third, like a new generation in a way. Like that, even though Mr. Emerson is so sad that he's like, oh, I taught him everything, and yet he's still sad, and he can't revel in these things.
Generation. Because George is our modern man in this piece, definitely.
He is our modern man.
I like that.
So so if we look at Lucy and George in, as kind of archetypes,
Right.
which
they're both
definitely
deconstructing and then reconstructing their worldviews.
Right, and
That's
gender
interesting.
at the same time.
And gender, sure.
Because she's just so, like she's in a swamp of gender, I feel like, throughout this whole book. And maybe that's part of what he's offering. I mean, that's said explicitly in the worldview of the Emersons, but maybe George manages to offer her a way out of gender. Don't feel like we're going to see that in the movie. I don't feel like that. These observations, I feel like, don't actually end up coming out properly in the movie. I don't know if they could really, but yeah, they probably could.
There's so much that's here. Yeah, just thematically, it would be impossible. I'm looking forward to seeing how they manage this as an adaptation at all.
Me too. Again, I mean, I haven't seen it in a few years. I've seen it so many times, and I love it. It is in the category of films that, like, if I was just changing channels, although I never do that anymore because now I just stream stuff. So
right. Exactly.
I never have that moment where I'm just changing channels, like, oh, look, this. I'm going to sit down and watch it. But it is one of those movies that if I stumble on it, I just sit down, just turn off everything and just watch it. I don't own it. Oh, no, wait, I did. I just bought it. I do own it.
There you go. Perfect.
But I didn't own it. So I was kind of amazed how many times I've seen it without owning it. But I love it very much.
Well, I'm definitely looking forward to it.
All right, Elizabeth, this has been so much fun. Do you have a favorite thing?
Mr. Emerson is my favorite thing, which I think is probably pretty obvious.
Fair enough.
Specifically, the whole chapter lying to Mr. Emerson.
Yes.
Oh, both times I listened to that, I was walking through campus. and just try not to weep openly. I found it so moving and lovely. I just think Mr. Emerson is golden salt of the earth people.
Yeah.
I want to know him. I want him to be real. I want to go and have tea and read books and just be friends. I love Mr. Emerson.
I think by our dinner party standards of characters, I would like to be at a dinner with you and Mr. Emerson. That would be really fun.
Oh man, that would be perhaps a bit saccharine, but yes, lovely.
It's okay. I would add the sarcasm to it.
There you go. Perfect.
That would be my job in the dinner.
And what was your favorite part, Daphne?
My favorite part is just a random quote. I don't know if this is my favorite part, but I like it, and I couldn't fit it in to any of the themes.
That sounds totally fair then. Okay.
So wait, this was... Oh, I don't even remember what it's in reference to, because it's from the Italy part, but I just love it. So it says, "Now this was abominably impertinent, and she ought to have been furious, but it is sometimes as difficult to lose one's temper as it is difficult at other times to keep it."
Uh-huh.
So I think what I'm saying here is that my favorite thing is Forrester's use of language.
Mm-hmm.
I just love how this man puts words together. I really do.
Yes, 100% agree. Yeah, he's among my favorites now. Yeah, absolutely. I love the prose.
Yeah, no, really incredible. He's just, Yes, he's one of those writers that I stop and I savor sentences.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
I love that. It's really fun when you get to read a book like that, where you're like, part of you wants to keep going. Even me who knew the story, I still get excited about certain parts of it. But yeah, part of me just has to stop and just reread a sentence and just...
It really invites you to linger, I think.
Yeah.
It's lovely.
It's just fun. It's light and fresh and wonderful, even though it has all of these amazing philosophical ideas and all of this thematic stuff and a really tight story. It just all fits together really beautifully and has really wonderful kind of throughout it parallels and structural things that are really fun, but also just some of the sentences are amazing.
Yes. Yeah, I completely agree. It reminds me a little bit of J.M. Barrie, actually. Have you read Peter Pan?
I have not read Peter Pan. We've had this discussion before, and I must.
Oh, the writing style is a little bit similar, actually. But, of course, Peter Pan is much lighter because it's for children, but... that same idea that you're just in this lovely place with these interesting people, and then but there's these beautifully crafted sentences and this really rich philosophy, and everything is saying a little bit more, and the meanings are so deep. It's lovely.
Oh, I know when we had this conversation, it was when you and Sarah were doing Disney Villain Deathmatch. I came on for the Peter Pan episode.
Right, for Hook. Yep,
because pirates.
Yep. Oh, that's fabulous.
All right.
And how perfect.
Speaking of pirates, we're going to have Louise Barnes join us in our next episode when we're talking about the movie A Room with a View. Louise has never, in fact, played a pirate, but she was on Black Sails, one of our favorite characters and one of our favorite performances. So go, everyone. I forgot to look if it's streaming anywhere because I bought it. So I don't know if
we'll find out.
A Room with a View is streaming, but go find it, go watch it. If you, I'm thrilled for everyone who maybe hasn't seen it because it is truly beautiful. Yeah. I'm pretty sure this is the first Merchant Ivory film.
I think so, because it was 85 or something.
85.
It was very early. Yes.
I remember exactly where I saw it.
Oh, wow.
Yep. I saw it in a theater in Georgetown in Washington, D.C.
Wow.
Yes, I love it very much. So that will be our next episode. And then we are not quite sure what we're doing for the rest of the fall, but we're going to come up with some really great things. I think a bit of a focus on films, because you and I are very busy.
Very busy ladies.
We are very busy ladies. This is going to be quite a fall for both of us in different ways. And so we're going to focus on movies for a little bit and give us and all of you a little break from this rigorous schedule of a book a month that we've done. It's been so much fun, but we'll go back to that someday, but we're going to do some other types of media for a bit, and starting with A Room with View.
Gorgeous. All right. Well, until next time, from Common Room Radio, I'm Elizabeth Stevens.
And I'm Daphne Olive. Can I Just Say podcast is a Common Room Radio production. For more information and our other shows, visit commonroomradio.com. To show your support, pledges of as little as $1 a month can make a big difference. Visit patreon.com/commonroomradio to pledge support and access bonus features that are just for patrons. And join the conversation by using the hashtag #CanIJustSay and follow us on Twitter @JustSayPodcast. We request that you keep your tweets respectful and positive, and you can always email us at podcast@commonroomradio.com. Thanks for listening.